I'm really, really excited about this session. And I'm going to kick it off and talk to John and Mike. So let me just kick in and talk to you guys. So, John, you started ZVerse 7 years ago as a software startup in the on-demand manufacturing space, which is kind of an interesting thing, especially 7 years ago. You've been at it for a while out of Columbia, South Carolina. And Mike, you've been a veteran of the world of operations, transportation, logistics, most recently as a startup advisor for a lot of e-commerce companies. Prior to that, at Walmart, Amazon, and FedEx. And at one point in time, you had led a team close to 70,000 people when you were at Amazon. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys. I'm going to start with John. So John, we're living in a very unusual time. But the story of your company, ZVerse, is actually really incredible, despite the times that we live in, and nothing seems to surprise us anymore. So let me first bring everyone up to speed. So at ZVerse, right, you've built this really amazing CAD as a service platform. You have a great team. You're solving a critical problem in the fast-growing world of on-demand manufacturing. 6 weeks ago, you're in the middle of a VC fundraise, and you have a term sheet in hand. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah.
And you have another one in the wing. So this must be an exciting time for you and your team to be, at that precipice and with those accomplishments and that success. But you also see some dark clouds emerging on the horizon. Then out of nowhere, your term sheets are withdrawn, and all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation of only a few weeks of cash left in the bank. What a sudden turn of events. That has to have been an emotional roller coaster. What were you feeling at that point in time? Can you tell us, when you were analyzing this, what were the options that you had in front of you?
The initial feeling, the week that pretty much the market inverted, was very lonely. Our entire team that week also was remote, had just gone remote. Here in South Carolina, it was a little bit longer than other places. So I sat here in this office where I'm sitting right now, and just wondering what am I going to do, and looking at our team and planning for potential layoffs, essentially, and wishing that I had taken the term sheet
right
days before.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, in this market, even if you had, who knows what would have happened, right? I mean,
Right,
we've seen all kinds of weird things. Okay, so with that dramatic introduction, tell us a little bit about what your company does, and then we'll get into what you experienced after the COVID pandemic really took its toll.
Yeah, so our company is a digital manufacturing platform. So we work with on-demand manufacturers, large traditional global manufacturers, and their customers, really to make to enable digital manufacturing. When I say that, a lot of that is additive manufacturing, but also just in general on-demand manufacturing or distributed manufacturing. So as opposed to the traditional manufacturing of building tools in China and putting things on the slow boat. So that's what we're all about, is enabling digital manufacturing.
Right. Okay. So now it's March 23rd, which is exactly a month ago. Mm-hmm. You've had a few days of trying to figure out what to do next. Obviously, very from a hospital CFO. Tell us what that was about.
Yeah. So March 23rd, I got one call I was on a Wednesday. Got a phone call from a CFO saying we need protective face shields, and it was really critical. He was sort of frantic, which is very strange to get a call from someone at that level of a hospital, and asked if we could produce 3,000 face shields, within 2 or 3 days. So we went to work to do that, utilizing our own internal 3D printing capabilities.
Yeah. So you got that order, and then I understand from some articles that have been written about your story that you started to get more and more progressively larger number of orders, right? So I mean, that's an interesting situation. You have limited capital, but you're getting these orders, but it takes capital to fulfill the orders. So how did you think about that? And the efficiency of the traditional on-demand manufacturing process for those types of things is not always known to be very high.
It was really super sort of complex situation and trying to thread this needle where we had a limited amount of cash left, but it was, we had bank covenants that I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with. And we started getting first day an order of 3,000 units of 3D printed face shields. The next day it was for 10,000 units, so I felt pretty good, like, hey, we might be able to dig ourselves out of this, position. Then the next day it was for 50,000 units. And at that point, I knew that, 3D printing was not going to be the path, because 3D printing is fantastic for low volume. You need something that doesn't exist tomorrow. But it's not great if you're looking at 50,000 units within 2 weeks type of situation. And so then I made a decision to move to injection molding. I knew that was the only way to actually achieve scale. And so I took the money that I would say is my money, but it's actually the bank's money at this point. I had nothing to lose. And so I invested it into tooling and went on the path for injection molding.
Right. So basically that path is you take a big chunk of money that you could be using to try to survive through this tough period, right? And you had to make the decision to hold on to that capital or to put it all down in terms of trying to scale yourself up to address the demand of these masks in the pandemic.
I mean,
is that right?
We had the option of, I felt like we tried to just 3D print meet demand. It would have been a situation of sort of Walking Dead, right? And so not understanding what's on the other side of this, it felt like we would just be spinning our wheels and really not getting any sort of, scale and digging ourselves out. So.
Right. Okay. So basically, at that point in time, you have to make this bet, and you choose to then go and invest in this very expensive process associated with an actually fairly lengthy process. So we're going to come back and talk a little bit about that and dig into that a little bit more. But let me go to Mike for a moment. So Mike, you've worked at large corporations most of your career. Even though many of your roles were basically startups inside those large organizations, right? So your background is you grew up in Europe, came to the US for school, got into the transportation industry early. So you've had your entire career kind of around operations and transportation and scaling up these very large networks. And over the course of this 30-year career, you've seen a lot of turns. But then at some point in time, you were working at FedEx SmartPost, and your number one customer starts to grow in this field called e-commerce. And this is of course Amazon. Now, you start to get the sense that the US transportation sector will be turned upside down. There'll be some kind of a transformation. And you decide to actually go to Amazon. So tell us a little bit about what made you feel like we're at that transition. And that's going to set us up to, I think, talk a little bit about what might happen in the future after this.
FedEx was really all I knew. I started working there when I was 19 years old. It was beer money, and 24 years later, I found myself as running operations for SmartPost, which was focused on residential customers. And I mean, you could already, this was around 2012, and already at that point, we were making investments just for Amazon. Their size and scale and the rate of their growth was so much so that you deploy a capital asset, and if that Amazon volume ever went away, even then there weren't customers of the size and scale to replace that volume. So something seemed like they were approaching the point where they had enough critical mass to consider doing something by themselves. I made a decision to go there, and now I'm seeing the fruits of those labors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the network that you built out there is now serving us, things that we didn't think we would ever buy from Amazon. So certainly, I think in many ways were, in that. At the center of that overhaul of a critical part of the American economy. And of course, Amazon's not the only network for that, but certainly the largest story there. So as you've seen this kind of play out since you've left Amazon and then built other networks. Do you think that the American transportation sector capacity is sized appropriately for e-commerce going forward? And how's that playing out during this COVID pandemic as you watch now from a different angle?
There's insufficient capacity for the growth of e-commerce, and fortunate to Amazon, they had the vision to recognize that years ago and begin to build it. But if you look at there was an article last week that sized up the small package space in the United States. It said that Amazon delivered last year 2.3 billion of their own packages. FedEx delivered 3.1 billion packages. UPS delivered 4.7 billion packages. And right now, this week, all of those networks are overwhelmed. They're all overwhelmed. We've now gone from e-commerce being a nice to have and maybe a lifestyle choice to being the lifeline and the only way to get goods and services. So if we're going to stay at these levels and we're only at 15% e-commerce penetration in the United States, who's going to deliver it?
Right. So in a way, from a consumer's point of view, the competition in the logistics and the transportation space actually is irrelevant because the size of that network is growing faster than any single company's ability to actually fulfill
absolutely.
Point,
and it's
right?
interesting because at the same time, there's a recent debate about the United States Postal Service and what they should be doing and what they shouldn't be doing. And they are actually the largest deliverer of packages. They delivered 6.2 billion packages last year. And so the notion that capacity itself is at risk and could potentially come off the table is crazy. Certainly for somebody that's dependent on those transportation systems to deliver goods and services.
So John and Mike, this is for both of you, right? In March, the Institution for Supply Management released a survey of U.S. manufacturing companies and actually a lot of enterprise companies in the space, and about half of them manufacturing, half of them non-manufacturing, and the results were actually quite interesting. 75% of the companies reported supply chain disruptions. 75% of American companies reported supply chain disruptions, and more than 44% said that they do not have a plan in place to address supply disruptions from China. So what I want to, Mike, you first, I want to talk a little bit about what this means. I mean, so obviously supply chain means a lot of things, and transportation is just the glue that binds them together. But we have this severe dependency on these really long-haul transportation networks and the supply chain. How is this working out in the
so I mean, immediately what we first saw was flights shut down, right? And there were the FedEx, UPS planes going, to and from Asia were shut down and grounded. When they were eventually allowed to come back up, I understand that restrictions were put in place and they had to really put 2 crews because there was a little bit of a quarantine that had to take place when they got to the destination. And so then that doubled up the amount of resources that went into that. And I think they implemented cost increases as a result of that. But then a lot of the world's supply chains dependent on belly cargo, excess capacity that's in commercial planes, and those legs have they're shut down. Those planes are parked. In the United States, principally everybody's just flying domestic flights, and that's just a fraction of what it was.
Yeah. So now coming back to manufacturing and American manufacturing. Yeah. So there's this theme of trying to figure out the lessons from what we're having to deal with. Obviously, part of those lessons are having to do with, we don't have the networks, let alone the supply chain as a whole, to be able to fulfill the demand. But at the same time, there's a question of manufacturing, right? So much of the manufacturing is actually still, the default is to go to China. So John, what are we learning here? I mean, can manufacturing come back to America? Should it come back to America? Do you think that distributed manufacturing, the types that you're trying to create an entire marketplace for, could that work at scale in a way that makes our economy more resilient?
I think absolutely. A lot of manufacturing can come back to stateside. It really depends on the parts themselves and what is being manufactured. But I think if you look at a lot of companies that have large service parts operations, right? So think of everything from, construction equipment to a refrigerator. There's a lot of parts that go into that have to be produced and maintained and stored in inventory and are brought on, long haul type of shipments. These things can be 3D printed today and done in low volumes. And all of that can be carried out, right, close to where their destination is or close to where the actual, the company is or distribution center is. Companies even like FedEx, who we've talked to many times, they've actually been innovating on this idea of, having a 3D printing operations on site. They have it there in Memphis, because to fix, for instance, plane parts today, right? I mean, if they can get, the planes sitting there on the tarmac and they're waiting for parts from Boeing, that's costly, right? But they can get that same part now can be 3D printed in metal, and they don't have to do the same sort of tooling that you do traditionally. So I think depending on what the parts are, absolutely it can be done domestically and really close to where they actually need them through processes like 3D printing. Now, in some cases, for actual things that not everything can be 3D printed, and it's still for certain scale you need injection molding and other forms of manufacturing. And today, one of the things that's really clear, to me, is here in the U.S., our factories are not really set up the same way as they are overseas in many areas, right? It's very difficult to get 12 cavity steel tools milled here in the U.S. And very costly to do that versus overseas. And so that is going to take some time, right? And I think it's going to take time for people to invest in that sort of manufacturing here because they want to make sure that, okay, whenever this goes away, that, I'm still going to have those customers and everyone won't start chasing back over to Asia again. But,
Okay. So, Mike, what message would you give to startups and small businesses across the country today?
Yeah, I mean, to the prior conversation, I think unemployment claims hit 26 million this week, which is a horrible number. And I got to believe that there's whole industry segments that will not come back at the size and scale, which means there are people that need to go to work. So it's an interesting time. I think we are seeing a shift in behavior. People that were naysayers to e-commerce, video conferencing, a whole bunch of habits in life. I was talking to somebody earlier from DoorDash. My parents in their 80s, they're now using DoorDash. They've been on Zoom meetings. There's this shift of people that were adverse to technology that now have found a way to deal with it. And I struggle to believe that there's going to be a retreat from that some of that will remain. And right, that creates opportunity.
So therein lies the opportunity to really focus on that. So we'll end this session by going back to John and talking about the rest of the story. John, bring us home. So now we have these orders. We left the story at the moment where you had all of these orders and you had to make that tough decision of putting all your chips down, all your capital in the company down to go into high scale situation. Now I'm told from what I've read online that is working out and you are now one of the largest producers of face masks, helping hospitals and healthcare workers on the front line, and you've scaled up. Is this true? Tell us how the story is going.
Yeah, so it's true. So we've produced a reusable face shield. This part's injection molded. This is polycarbonate. And we started out with just that one order of 5,000 to 10,000 and 50,000. And before we actually publicly made any statement, we already had orders of, I believe, 2 million units. And now we're well over 3 million. We believe we'll probably produce 20 million within the next 2.5 months to 3 months. We're introducing now also, and we have 25 injection molding machines running through our platform. A team of 20 who are all working remote now. And that's the power of digital manufacturing itself. But it's been a while.
Yeah.
What a great story. I mean, the backdrop obviously being very sad, and the human suffering is incalculable. around it. But what a great story, and kudos to you and all the other entrepreneurs and small businesses around the country who are responding to basic needs and retooling themselves. It's such an incredible story, and it was really enjoyable chatting with you guys. And at the end, of the other end of this, when in-person meetings are on vogue again, I look forward to spending a lot more time with you guys. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the time. Thank you.